This is the definition of school-based family counseling. It's an integrated approach to mental health that focuses on both school and family in order to help children overcome personal problems and succeed at school. School and family are the two most important social institutions that affect young children, and linking them together is the rationale for this approach. We call it school-based family counseling. If we look at this, what we call the school-based family counseling meta model, we're trying to link these two interventions to get more positive results in helping children succeed at school personally and academically. The term school-based refers to an emphasis on school success, not on the site of the intervention. There are many school-based family counseling programs where the counseling takes place in a community agency, but the classic form is to have it done right at the school site. The term school-based family counseling is a meta model, and it's one that's designed so that it can be used by any of the mental health professions, and it can be used across any theoretical approaches, although school-based family counseling is essentially a systems approach. These are the professionals that typically carry out school-based family counseling, and they're all the mental health professions, and there's a role that's performed by many teachers. So it's not meant to be an approach that replaces the traditional mental health approaches. It's meant to be a supplementary approach. The first school-based family counselor was Alfred Adler, founder of the individual approach to therapy, or the Adlerian approach. He was an Austrian psychiatrist, and he worked with schools and families. And if you look at the writings of Adlerians, a lot of the writings are aimed at educators and aimed at parents. And what Adler did that was amazing was in the 1920s, he established 28 guidance clinics throughout Vienna and based them at schools throughout the city. And what would happen at these guidance clinics is he would do demonstrations in an auditorium with an audience of parents and teachers, where he would have a teacher describe a problem for a child and have the parent come in and describe what's going on at home. And then he would interview the child and demonstrate a way to handle the problem. So in traditional school mental health intervention, these are the approaches that school counselors are typically taught: academic counseling, guidance groups, teacher consultation, individual counseling and therapy. And in traditional family mental health intervention, these are the approaches that are typically taught, not all of them, but the ones that really differentiate school counseling from family therapy. And in school-based family counseling, we do an integration of these either within the person of the mental health professional or using a team approach. So we look at common school problems, which are listed here. We feel that these are frequently linked to common family problems. You know, when you come to school and your parents are divorcing, this marital conflict, it's hard to concentrate on your schoolwork. So we see a connection between these two things as we think about how to make an intervention. We also consider the family important, not just as a source of problems, but as a source of resources for helping children in schools to do better. And that's something that's often neglected to be considered by mental health professionals. I'm going to skip over this slide that lists the typical courses that are taught in school mental health programs and family mental health programs and how they're integrated in school-based family counseling, and skip on to what I call the school-based family counseling meta model. And here we look at school versus family focus and prevention versus intervention focus. And there's 4 quadrants: school prevention, family prevention, school intervention, and family intervention. And when we work with a problem that a child is having, we try to focus on all of these areas. These are the sort of courses and areas that are looked at when you make an intervention in that particular area. I'm going to skip ahead now and show you an example of a school-based family counseling assessment. Let's suppose we have 2 boys where Mark is bullying Luis, and Luis's parents, the Rodriguez, are shown to the left here. Luis has an underinvolved relationship with his father. There's some conflict between his parents. Mark is living with his grandparents who experience a lot of rebelliousness from him at home. The teacher is somewhat underinvolved with Luis. Mark, when he bullies Luis, there are student bystanders. This is considered important in bullying and enabling the bully. And the principal, for this case, is not aware what's going on in the classroom or with the student bystanders. So in terms of doing intervention, what might this look like from a school-based family counseling point of view? It might look like this. With Luis and Mark, you might do individual counseling with each of them. You might do teacher consultation with the classroom teacher, and maybe pay some attention with the teacher to classroom management. You might also, with the Rodriguez family, do family counseling and parent consultation, and possibly couples counseling. And with the Smith family, you might be thinking about similar sorts of things. With the principal, you would want to do principal consultation, particularly if you're going to do anything with school prevention. So you might hold a classroom meeting with Ms. Jones's class in order to address the topic of bullying with the whole class. And you might do guidance groups across the entire school, bullying prevention programs, for example. You might also do parent education of teachers around the topic of bullying. So that's just an example, and it's independent of theoretical orientation other than the systems focus. And how I might organize this, I might do school intervention first, followed by family intervention, and then move up to school prevention, then finally family prevention. So you need to think about how you would do that. The purpose of the school-based family counseling meta model is to help school-based family counseling practitioners think systemically about where to make the intervention. The intervention can also be made at the community level because sometimes schools lack resources. So you might facilitate an after-school program with an agency. You might arrange visits from a community crisis team if there's been a shooting at a school, which seems to happen more frequently in our country here. You might arrange for a public library to host films on parenting, and you might arrange for respite care for a single mother dealing with an ill parent. Those are just examples of how community is thought about as being an important variable for mobilizing resources for children's schools and families. Schools are often tremendously under-resourced, and we want to step in if any way we can to be an advocate for children, families, and schools. There are many different types of school-based family delivery program. I'm not going to go into these. Some are at the school site, some are at the community sites. What the literature shows about school-based family counseling is that there is broad support for this across the mental health disciplines. I have a review of the article literature in a journal I mentioned a little later on, where there's about 100 articles that you can go and look up if you want. The strongest support is in the school mental health literature, and there's moderate evidence-based support that has appeared in the last decade. And these are the 8 studies that are randomized control group studies that have compared school-based family counseling with school-only versus family-only. And all of them show that when you have the combined intervention at the family level and the school level, you get much better results. To summarize, the strengths of school-based family counseling are its systems approach, the Brownian concept that one part of the system affects the entire system. So working with just an individual in isolation, and it's not that you can't work with individuals, and many school-based family counselors do work just with individuals because the family won't come in or only one parent will be involved. We use the family systems approach to conceptualize the case. As we work with a child, we think about family, school, peer group, and community. And we're always thinking about these different levels and how they can be integrated. School-based family counseling is a strength-based approach rather than taking a pathology focus. So when the school-based family counseling practitioner contacts the parents, it's not, your child's having trouble at school, you guys need to go to community counseling center and get some mental health counseling. It's, we want to help your child do well at school. Will you come and meet with us so we can talk about how to help your child succeed? It's an entirely different kind of focus. There's a strong partnership emphasis. We look on parents as sort of co-facilitator in helping the child succeed at school. And there's a huge body of research now that's been conducted the last 20 years that shows that parent engagement is one of the critical factors in whether or not children succeed in school. It's not so much what the teachers do, it's whether the parents are involved. This is also a multiculturally sensitive approach. Instead of a pathology focus using the DSM, there's an educational focus. Instead of an individual focus, which is very Amerocentric, we have a family focus, which is very appealing to many cultures. Instead of seeing the family as interfering, we see the family as resources, and we frequently try to do consultation at the school site, and that's the program that Tony is going to talk about in a minute. Child advocacy role is the center of what we do. We see the school and the family as our clients, but we also see the child as our client, and we give primacy to child advocacy role that we have. We also are very interested in the promotion of school transformation, just as families can have problems that lead one to think about the importance of family therapy. Schools can be an area of difficulty and an area of challenge. And one of the readings I used to recommend to my students was a book called The Neurotic Organization. So if you want to read more about this, Wikipedia is a resource area. You can also look at the International Journal for School-Based Family Counseling, which is online. And there are a lot of books now that are available on school-based family counseling. The top two on the left are ones that I've been involved with, and there are several others. I'm going to turn now to Tony, who's going to describe a specific example of the school-based family counseling program.
The Center for Child and Family Development today is primarily working only with private schools, although it has a history of working with both public and private. The incentive these days for working with primarily Roman Catholic and Christian schools in San Francisco has to do with funding source. The federal government, through an entitlement known as Title I, has actually allocated resources for under-resourced and underserved children in private schools. And the notion of a private school often conjures up ski week, fancy cars lining up in the neighborhood, coming to pick up children. And these are not our private schools. Our private school students are largely on scholarship, both in the Roman Catholic system and also with these individual Christian schools. In addition, were these children in a public school, they would automatically be receiving extra resources. Historically, no one knew, at least in San Francisco, about the option for federal funding. And it's literally taken the center from being almost ready to shutter its doors to breathing life, quite a bit of life, into how we operate. We are somewhat constricted because we are following the guidelines of all of the universities who send their students to us. They're in master's level programs. We now have one WISER student, and we need to adhere to whatever the university's requirements are for those students. In addition, if you think of the Board of Behavioral Sciences, a bit like the IRS, you don't want to make enemies with this particular agency. So we're very, very diligent about staying in compliance with what the board regulations are, and of course, keeping in close alliance with California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. These days, with the advent of the LPC license in California, we're now taking students who have opted to go on a combined specialization. But quite honestly, the lead that we take and the orientation that we take is much more centered around LMFT, marriage and family. That's largely because the LPC part of the university programs is a kind of add-on, and the add-on is very minor at this point. Whether people go on to become licensed in both areas is not yet determined, just because of the number of hours involved.
Okay.
Each one of our students, grad students, is assigned to a school, and the expectation is that they will work with a total of 10 clients and families. And that's because our supervision complement is 1 hour of individual and 2 of group. That's good compliance for the board. We're in 9 schools currently, and between you, me, and a lamppost, we're looking into the idea of seeing what we can do with Oakland Unified School District and the private schools that reside there, primarily, again, Roman Catholic and Christian. Right now, there are no mental health programs on site in those schools, and we'd like to replicate the model in the East Bay, encourage more wiser students to come, but also East Bay universities, where this whole issue of commuting has been, it often designates where people are going to do a placement. So what are our presenting problems? Everything that you would think of in non-religious schools. And I make that distinction because where people are underserved and poverty and racism are at the fore of everyday life is really hard. So what do we see? Child abuse, domestic violence, substance abuse, terror on immigration issues. Last year, we had 3 parents deported. So far this year, I haven't heard anything. The fact that the service is held in the school building, which still is not a 100% safe place for all people in the city, we do get a fair amount of parent participation. Of course, everything with the pandemic now is handled online with all of the mess of technological problems that you can encounter. I'll try not to dwell on the now in the hopes that we can return to the kind of robust program that we once knew, and especially now with having a funding source. The mission of the center is very much an anti-racist social justice platform. We keep that alive in all of our supervision discussions. And we have monthly trainings, which we require our trainees and some associates to attend. When I say some associates, most associates these days are looking for paid work, which is understandable. Although we offer a modest stipend, I'm inclined to say, don't quit your day job. The challenges with school-based family counseling in our particular center, with our particular schools, has to do, I think, with a lack of progressiveness around education. These schools are not traditionally Roman Catholic in the sense of, you saw that woman with her ruler. You know, history tells us that the sisters were there with the ruler. Our teachers are not there with a ruler, but the pressure on them to produce academically oriented students is great, and it's unremitting. The stress that they and public school teachers experience is ugly. And that's because they're trying to set forth expectations and reaching students where they're not. And the adjustment to reaching students where they are is a very slow process. So one of our presenting problems, of course, is kids who act out and get labeled oppositional and worse. The knowledge of where trauma fits in to misbehavior in a classroom is something we're trying to increase. As much as the Catholic Church sees itself as a charitable organization, there are some gaps, please forgive me, in their loving kindness approach. when it comes to schools. Often parents pick Catholic schools because they're afraid of public schools. And the irony is, in doing so, they end up going to schools where there are actually fewer resources available. Certainly, there are very few mental health people on board. Heaven forbid there is a learning difference. There are no services for those children. And the referral process is back to the school district. There are many unidentified special education students. There are many unidentified neurodiverse students. And given what these schools can offer, and they're actually financially strapped schools. Church is not financially strapped. The schools are. It's very limited. So I'm trying to emphasize that this population mirrors all that we read about for low performing urban kids who are being ignored for societal reasons and for very real reasons in everyday life. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask me?
Okay, in supervising student teachers over many years, we did have some in Catholic schools, and actually my own son went to a Catholic high school. And I found that a lot of the curriculum was just very old, very uninspiring. I remember having a conference with my son's social studies teacher, an African-American man, who said to me point blank, the purpose of this course is for your child to do well on standardized exams. And I thought, oh my God, I put my child here, I can't believe it. And I looked around his office, I said, you're an African-American man. Is this what you want to be teaching? Is this your largest goal for education? And the school had many, many African-American Latino children. So I'm just wondering what you're observing, because a lot of times when that approach to education is like this, then the approach to mental health and it, is not very progressive either.
Well, I think when I first started doing school-based, the divide was something like this between mental health and the school. I would say that we're like this now. So it's getting better.
Good.
But the fact is that the reasons for the referrals are often inappropriate, because if you decide that a child is psychopathological on the basis of that child's actions in the classroom, we would have referrals that would go through the roof. We're trying to educate teachers on the aspect of adverse childhood experiences, what it means to grow up in a community where resources are devoid. If you come from a stressful background, often either the inward behavior that is problematic in a school or the outward behavior gets recognized as behavior and not as something else. So it's a struggle, but we're working with teacher ed to try and get our foot in the door. The other thing, quite honestly, is these teachers and these administrators are not paid very much. They don't have a union, and their strength in terms of pushback is very limited in terms of trying to move forward, excuse me, with a more user-friendly model. I'm sounding very critical of our clients, and I don't want you to have the idea that I'm sitting in judgment or that we have our trainees sit in judgment. We're there to help, we're there to serve, and this is the population. And sometimes when you work with a population who is not necessarily aligned with all the good things that we pat ourselves on the back for, it's a very slow process. But if you think about the center having been in existence since the mid-1980s, thank you, Dr. Gerrard, obviously we've been able to sustain a model throughout, many trials and tribulations. And I will say this, I think that we're in a time both with our government and the pandemic where the consequences to these children is atrocious. I have no other word for what it's like to hear our children's stories.
Mhm. Yeah.
We want those stories and we encourage them.
Right.
At some point, Tony, we don't have today. I'd be interested in hearing more about your ongoing conversations with anybody in Oakland.
Right. Yeah. And if you're looking to go into Oakland, I can make some recommendations to open-minded, kind administrators who would value and appreciate what you do.
And I will keep you posted of that effort. I'm feeling cautiously optimistic.